Laura stood at the doorway, her hand resting lightly on the frame, staring at this small room her stepson, Ethan, had claimed as his own. The walls were covered in posters of landscapes and old movie scenes, and his desk was cluttered with books and sketch pads. She felt a twinge of guilt. She knew how much he struggled with school, friends, and the quiet tension in the house ever since she had moved in. Mark, her husband, was always busy with work, traveling often, leaving her alone to navigate the complex world of step-parenting. And now, as she looked into Ethan's room, she realized she had never truly understood what it meant to share his space, even just for a moment. She stepped inside, careful not to disturb the scattered papers on the floor. Ethan was sitting cross-legged on the bed, sketching something intently, his brow furrowed. The soft scratch of pencil on paper filled the room, punctuated by the occasional sigh of frustration. Laura didn't want to startle him, so she quietly sat on the chair by the window, watching him. The dim light of late afternoon fell through the blinds, casting stripes across the room, making the scene feel almost cinematic. She could see how much he had grown, how much he carried inside, and a strange warmth and protectiveness filled her chest. "Hey, Ethan," she said softly, her voice careful but warm. He looked up, startled for a moment, then relaxed when he saw her smiling. "I didn't hear you come in," he said, trying to hide his nervousness. Laura shook her head gently. "I didn't want to interrupt. I just thought I could sit for a while, if that's okay." He hesitated but nodded, returning his gaze to the sketchpad. "Sure. Yeah." There was a tension in his posture, a quiet unease she had learned to recognize over the months. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't anger. It was the subtle armor of a boy who had learned to keep his feelings tucked away. Laura understood it. She had felt similar walls in her own childhood for a few minutes. The only sound was the scratching of his pencil and the faint hum of the city outside the window. Laura took a deep breath and let herself settle into the quiet. She noticed how he drew with intensity, the lines on the paper precise but hesitant in some places. It reminded her of a young artist she had once tutored, someone who needed encouragement more than instruction. She decided to try a different approach. She said gently, leaning forward slightly. "Sometimes the best drawings come when you stop worrying about making them perfect. Just let your hand follow what your heart wants to say." Ethan paused, pencil hovering midair. He looked at her, eyebrows raised in surprise, and then slowly nodded. "Okay," he whispered. The tension in the room seemed to ease slightly. Laura smiled at him, a small, genuine curve of her lips. "Do you want me to tell you a secret?" she asked. "I used to be terrified of drawing in front of other people. I would hide my sketchbooks for weeks, worried someone would laugh or judge." Ethan's eyes widened, curiosity replacing the guarded expression he usually wore. "Really?" he asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and intrigue. Laura nodded, her gaze soft. "Really? I learned that the only way to get better is to let people see your work, even if it's not perfect. That's how you grow, Ethan. And I think you're ready to grow if you're willing." He looked back at the sketchpad, thoughtful, and then something changed. The pencil moved faster, the lines more confident, less hesitant. Laura watched quietly, feeling a surge of pride she tried to keep contained. It was a small moment, but it was significant. A step toward connection and trust. Time passed quickly. The light outside faded, and the room grew darker, but neither of them noticed. Laura finally spoke again, her voice soft, almost tentative. "Ethan, can I ask you something?" He looked up, pencil still in hand. "Yeah. Do you ever feel like no one really understands you? Like, even when people are around, they don't see what's going on inside?" She didn't expect an answer, but Ethan's eyes met hers, and for a fleeting second, the armor slipped. "All the time," he admitted quietly. "Sometimes I think everyone just assumes things about me, about my grades, my friends, my mood. Nobody really asks." Laura's heart ached at his words. "I get that. I know it feels lonely sometimes. But you don't have to go through it alone, Ethan. Not if you don't want to." He studied her for a moment, a flicker of hope crossing his face. Then, almost shyly, he shifted his sketchpad so she could see his drawing. It was a picture of the three of them, Laura, Mark, and Ethan, sitting at the dinner table, smiling. The lines were rough, but the emotion was clear. "I drew this," he said softly. "I guess I wanted to show what it could be like if things were okay." Laura felt tears prick her eyes. "It's beautiful, Ethan. Really. Thank you for sharing this with me." She reached out and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. He flinched slightly at first, but then leaned into her touch, allowing himself to feel comforted for the first time in days. They stayed like that for a while, quietly sharing the warmth of a small but meaningful connection. The city's evening lights twinkled outside, and Laura felt a sense of calm she hadn't felt in weeks. It was a moment suspended in time, the beginning of understanding, of rebuilding trust, of forming a bond neither of them had dared to expect eventually. Laura stood up, stretching slightly. "I should let you get some sleep," she said. Ethan nodded reluctantly, already returning to his sketchpad, but now with a different energy, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. As she left the room, she looked back once more, seeing him immersed in his art, and whispered to herself, "We're going to get through this together." The night settled around the house, and Laura felt a cautious hope. She knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be misunderstandings, awkward moments, and challenges that only a family could face. But for the first time, she sensed a path opening, a way to truly connect. Not just as a step-parent, but as someone who genuinely cared. Someone who would stand beside him through the struggles and triumphs alike. And as she closed the door softly behind her, the soft hum of the city outside mixing with the quiet scratching of pencil on paper, she realized that sometimes the smallest gestures, a conversation, a shared moment, a word of encouragement could change everything. The next morning, Laura woke early, the soft glow of dawn streaming through the curtains. She tiptoed past Ethan's room, hearing the quiet rustle of him moving around. Likely sketching again or preparing for school. She paused at the doorway, taking a deep breath. Yesterday had been surprising. The small moment they shared had shifted something, a fragile trust beginning to grow. Laura didn't want to push too far, didn't want to scare him. But she also knew that if she wanted to truly connect, she had to step out of her comfort zone. She entered the kitchen quietly. The aroma of coffee filled the air, and she poured herself a cup, savoring the warmth. Mark was already gone, off to one of his early meetings, leaving her alone to plan the day. She sat at the table, thinking about Ethan, the boy who had always seemed distant. As if the walls around him were made of glass, visible but impossible to penetrate. She knew that the sketches he made yesterday weren't just drawings. They were windows into his mind. And windows, she realized, sometimes needed to be opened gently. Ethan came down shortly after, his backpack slung over one shoulder, hair tousled from sleep. He avoided looking directly at her at first, busying himself with breakfast, pouring cereal into a bowl with careful attention. Laura watched quietly, letting him have space, then finally spoke. "Good morning, Ethan," she said softly. His head lifted slightly, and he offered a small, tentative smile. "Morning," he replied. Quieter than usual. She placed her coffee on the table. "Do you want to talk about yesterday?" she asked, careful not to sound pushy. Ethan froze slightly, spoon halfway to his mouth. Then he shook his head quickly. "Not really," he mumbled. Laura nodded, hiding her disappointment. "That's okay," she said gently. "You don't have to. But I want you to know I really appreciated you sharing your drawing with me. It meant a lot." Something in his eyes shifted. He glanced at her, curious now, but still cautious. "You really mean that?" he asked, almost whispering. "I do," she said firmly. "I really do. And if you ever want to talk or just sit quietly together, I'm here." The day went on, and Laura found herself keeping glances toward him whenever she could at breakfast. While he packed for school, even when he went to his room, she felt a mixture of hope and worry. Hope because she could sense a subtle change in his demeanor. Worry because trust, once broken or withheld, was delicate and slow to rebuild. Later that afternoon, Laura was tidying up the living room when she heard a knock on the door. It was Ethan, holding his sketch pad tightly against his chest. "Can I show you something?" he asked, voice hesitant, but steadier than yesterday. "Of course," Laura said, smiling warmly. She led him to the small couch in the corner, and he carefully opened the sketch pad. The drawings inside were detailed and expressive, a series of little moments captured like snapshots, a bird perched on a fence, a rainy street corner, a quiet kitchen with the morning sun streaming in. Each one was a story in itself, reflecting emotion and observation, capturing feelings he hadn't yet put into words. "These are amazing," Laura said softly, genuinely impressed. "You've got such an eye for detail. And these tell stories. I can feel what you were thinking." Ethan looked down, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "Thanks. I wasn't sure if you'd like them." "I do," she said firmly. "I really do. And I think you're talented." "Really talented." He paused, then asked quietly, "Do you ever feel like no one notices what you're feeling?" Laura's chest tightened. She had asked him a similar question yesterday, but hearing it again, phrased differently, made her realize how much he needed understanding. "Sometimes," she admitted, choosing her words carefully. "And when that happens, it helps to share it with someone who listens. Even if it's just through drawing or writing or talking quietly. It matters." For a moment, Ethan didn't speak. Then he nodded, almost imperceptibly, and returned to his sketching. Laura stayed beside him, sipping her coffee and watching, not intervening, just being present. The quiet companionship filled the room with a gentle warmth, a kind of connection that required no words, only presence and trust. As the evening approached, Mark returned from work. He paused at the doorway, noticing the unusual calm in the house. Laura gave him a small, reassuring smile, silently signaling that all was well. Ethan, still immersed in his drawings, didn't look up, but Laura knew he had noticed his father entering. She wondered briefly if Mark would ask about the sketches or if he would simply observe quietly. She chose not to worry. This was a moment for Ethan, not for any adult commentary. Dinner was quiet but not tense. Ethan shared small bits of conversation, animatedly describing a story he had read at school. Laura listened, laughing at the right moments, encouraging him gently when he faltered. She could feel the shift. The walls around him were softening, little by little, and the room, the house, even the family dynamic seemed slightly warmer, slightly closer. After dinner, Ethan retreated to his room again. Laura considered joining him, but decided to give him space. Instead, she cleaned the kitchen slowly, reflecting on the day. Trust, she realized, wasn't built in grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was small things, listening, acknowledging, sitting quietly, sharing subtle encouragements. And in those small things, a foundation could be laid, a foundation of understanding, care, and mutual respect. Later that night, Laura sat by the window in her own room, watching the city lights twinkle. She thought about Ethan's sketches, the quiet moments in his room, the hesitant trust that had begun to emerge. She realized that being a step-parent wasn't about enforcing authority or managing rules. It was about patience, compassion, and learning to meet a child where they were emotionally, even when it was uncomfortable or unfamiliar. The day had taught her something important. Connection wasn't instant. It was gradual, built through small gestures and consistent presence. And she felt a cautious optimism, the kind that comes when you've seen the first signs of change in someone's eyes. And you know that the next steps, while uncertain, are filled with potential. As she prepared for bed, Laura thought about the next day. She wanted to encourage Ethan more, to create moments where he could feel safe expressing himself, whether through art, conversation, or shared quiet time. She knew challenges would come, as they always did, but she felt more ready than before. And for the first time, she truly believed that with patience and empathy, she could become not just a step-parent, but a trusted ally, a safe harbor in the sometimes stormy seas of adolescence. She turned off the light and listened to the soft hum of the house. Ethan's sketchpad was still open in his room, the faint glow of his desk lamp spilling into the hallway. Laura smiled to herself, a quiet, heartfelt smile, and whispered softly, We're getting there. Together. And with that thought, she drifted off to sleep. The promise of tomorrow carrying a quiet, enduring hope for both her and her stepson. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the kitchen, and Laura moved quietly. Making breakfast for herself and Ethan, she had learned over the past 2 days that routines could be comforting. Small gestures could be meaningful, and presence mattered more than words. When Ethan appeared at the doorway, rubbing his eyes and yawning, she felt a surge of warmth. He looked lighter somehow, less burdened. His posture was straighter, his movements less hesitant. "Morning," she said softly, setting a plate of toast and fruit on the table. "Morning," Ethan replied, his voice more confident than usual. There was a rhythm to the house now, subtle but noticeable. Laura realized that trust, once sown, could grow quickly when nurtured with patience. They ate together in comfortable silence, punctuated by the occasional remark about school or plans for the weekend. Laura noticed Ethan glancing at her occasionally, a flicker of curiosity or thoughtfulness crossing his face. She smiled gently, understanding the unspoken questions, the desire to test the waters. To see if this connection could hold. After breakfast, Ethan asked quietly, "Can we go to the park later?" Laura felt a surge of happiness. "Of course," she said, her tone gentle but enthusiastic. She knew this was significant. He was asking, inviting, opening the door to shared experiences. And she wanted to walk through it with him, carefully, respectfully. The park was quiet in the late morning, the sun warm and forgiving. They found a bench under a large oak tree, the leaves rustling softly in the breeze. Ethan pulled out his sketchpad again, but this time he didn't bury himself in it completely. He glanced around, pointing out a squirrel or a patch of sunlight that caught his attention. Laura listened, asked questions, and offered gentle observations, creating a dialogue that wasn't forced but natural. "You've got a good eye for detail," she said, watching him sketch a cluster of flowers near the bench. "I think it's amazing how you notice these small things." Ethan shrugged, but there was pride in his eyes. I just like to see things," he admitted. "Some people don't notice." "That's true," Laura agreed. "But noticing is important. You see the world differently, and that's special." For the next hour, they wandered slowly through the park. Ethan talked about school, friends, and a story he had been reading. Laura listened intently, laughing softly at moments that deserved it, nodding thoughtfully at moments that carried weight. She realized that connection didn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it was the steady presence, the quiet attention, the shared acknowledgement of life's details that built the deepest bonds. At one point, Ethan stopped near a fountain, watching the water ripple and catch the sunlight. He turned to Laura, expression serious. I like spending time with you," he said softly. "I don't always know how to say it, but I feel better when you're around." Laura felt her chest tighten, a mix of pride, relief, and emotion washing over her. "I like spending time with you too, Ethan," she replied. "And I'm glad you feel that way, because I want you to always feel safe with me, to share, to be yourself, to grow." They sat quietly by the fountain, the soft sound of water creating a peaceful backdrop. Laura realized that moments like these, small, understated, but profoundly meaningful, were the foundation of their relationship. Trust wasn't a single gesture. It was a series of consistent, caring actions, combined with patience and understanding. As the afternoon progressed, they returned home. Ethan went to his room to work on more sketches, and Laura busied herself with household tasks. But she kept glancing toward his room, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. The relationship was changing, evolving into something genuine, steady, and emotionally supportive. Later, Mark returned from work. Laura noticed him glance at Ethan, who was deeply focused on his drawing, and then at her. She gave him a small nod, silently communicating what had shifted. Mark smiled faintly, understanding without words. The house felt lighter, more open, more connected. That evening, Laura knocked lightly on Ethan's door. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Sure," he said, looking up from his sketchpad. There was no hesitation now, no subtle walls to navigate. He had accepted her presence as something safe and supportive. She sat beside him, watching him draw. "I love seeing your work," she said. "Every sketch tells a story." Ethan smiled faintly. "Thanks," he replied. "I like that you notice." They spoke quietly about the images he had drawn, the stories they contained, and the emotions they conveyed. Laura didn't interrupt or critique. She only encouraged, acknowledged, and shared gentle observations. The room was filled with a calm intimacy, a connection born from trust and shared understanding. As the night grew darker, Laura suggested they take a short walk outside. The neighborhood was quiet, the street lamps casting pools of warm light along the pavement. Ethan walked beside her, shoulders relaxed, expression thoughtful. Laura felt a wave of gratitude for the small victories, for the gradual opening of his heart, for the first real signs of connection. They returned home and settled into the living room. Laura suggested they read together, something light and comforting, and Ethan agreed. He climbed onto the couch, sketchpad in hand, and Laura joined him with a book. They read quietly, occasionally sharing a remark or a thought. The silence between them filled with comfort rather than tension. At bedtime, Ethan hesitated before going to his room. Laura noticed the flicker of hesitation, the subtle need for reassurance. "I'll see you in the morning," she said softly, smiling. "Sleep well, Ethan." He nodded, a small but genuine smile appearing. "Good night, Laura," he said. And for the first time, she felt that these words weren't just a formality. They carried trust, warmth, and a connection that had been missing before. As Laura prepared for bed in her own room, she reflected on the journey of the past few days. It hadn't been easy. There had been awkward silences, hesitations, and subtle tensions. But she had learned that patience, empathy, and consistent care could bridge even the most guarded hearts. She realized that parenting, especially step-parenting, wasn't about authority or control. It was about presence, understanding, and gently encouraging growth. She thought about Ethan's sketches, the small gestures, the quiet conversations, and the shared moments in the park and at home. They weren't dramatic or grand, but they were real, authentic, and meaningful. And in that authenticity lay the promise of a stronger, healthier relationship, one built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. Finally, as she turned off the light, Laura whispered softly to herself, "We're getting there, Ethan, every day. A little more." She felt a profound sense of hope, knowing that the foundation they had begun to build would carry them forward through challenges, triumphs, and everything in between. The house was quiet, filled with the gentle rhythm of night. Ethan's room glowed softly from the lamp beside his bed, the sketchpad resting on his desk, a silent testament to the progress they had made. Laura lay in her bed, heart full, and drifted into sleep with a sense of accomplishment, knowing that the connection they had nurtured, small, steady, and genuine, was one that could grow into something lasting, warm, and deeply meaningful. And in that quiet night, surrounded by the soft hum of the house, the promise of tomorrow shone brightly. A new day, a new opportunity, and a renewed bond between stepmother and stepson, grounded in patience, love, and heartfelt understanding.